Next, I want to turn to the story of Margaret Court. I want to talk actually a little bit about Margaret Court's history and then make some lessons from it. Over the last couple of weeks, there's been quite a lot of talk because the Australian Open has been on and Margaret Court was honoured for the 50th anniversary of her Grand Slam. Now, let's talk about her legacy for a second. For those who don't know, and I know many of you do, but I didn't until recently, there's 4 Grand Slam titles every year in the tennis calendar. You've got the Australian Open, you've got the French Open, you've got Wimbledon, and you've got the US Open. Winning one of those events means that you have a Grand Slam title, or that you've got a major title. And the person, whether male or female, with the most Grand Slam titles of any player in history is Margaret Court. Her record has held for 50-odd years. She leads with 24 singles Grand Slam titles. Now, some people observe that there are players who are closing in on that 24 number. But those who do so often forget something. They forget that Margaret Court also played doubles and mixed doubles. And if you count up her singles, doubles and mixed doubles Grand Slam titles, she has an eye-watering 64 Grand Slam titles. 24 singles, as we said, 21 mixed doubles and 19 women's doubles. That's mental. It's so far ahead that it's just unbelievable. And now there's that, but then there's another aspect to her achievements, or several others. Try on this one. To do the Grand Slam, as they say, you have to win all 4 of those Grand Slam titles in a single year. So you've got to win the Australian Open, then go to France and win the French Open, then go to the UK and win Wimbledon, and then America and win the US Open. You've got to do that in one year. Very few tennis players, very few have achieved that feat. Only 2 tennis players in all of history have done it twice. One of them is Rod Laver. The other one is Margaret Court, both Australians. Only one player has done it 3 times. Margaret Court. She did it once in singles and twice in doubles. But see, it doesn't even end there because there's something else. Margaret Court did all of this whilst having and raising 4 children and retiring for a period of nearly 2 years when she got married, and during that time not touching a tennis racket. Margaret Court is, without a doubt, the greatest tennis player of all time. If the Margaret Court Arena were to be renamed, it would be an absolute travesty. But you know, I'm not ruling out the possibility that one day it could be renamed. In the same way that Israel Folau, one of football's finest players, could be effectively banned from playing in Australia. Because here's the thing. Your view of the LGBT issue has become the litmus test of whether you will be accepted in society. More than that, actually, it's become the litmus test of whether you will be seen as a good person or a bad person in society. You see, it matters not anymore that Margaret Court is a mentor, a counsellor, a founder of massive charities that do tremendous charitable work, and she's a mentor and a counsellor to stacks of people, and a pastor in that she helps the community in so many profound ways. We're supposed to know whether Margaret Court is a good person, not by what she does, but by what she says and thinks about the subject of LGBT pride. It matters not that she's the greatest tennis player of all time. We're supposed to decide whether she's worth honouring, whether the arena should be there, not based on her talent, but by her thinking on LGBT pride, which is, frankly, as ridiculous as saying that we should decide whether someone's worthy of being honoured for their skill and achievement, or whether somebody should be viewed as somebody who's done great and constructive things based on their opinion about religion or about people of faith. See, the media and the gatekeepers of public discourse say that this is important. Why? Because it's about love and hatred, thereby implying that Christians or people who speak and believe traditional things about sexuality and so on actually hate LGBT people. Some people accept that because they don't understand religion and they're kind of pre-primed by society to accept it. Others accept it because it's convenient. They know that it's not the real issue, but it helps them to push their political agenda. But I want to be very clear about this. The difference between the two sides of the issue is not hatred and love. Everyone in this argument, in respect of their attitude towards LGBT people, except the tiniest fringe minority, none of those people are motivated by hatred. Whether it's Joe Public, who thinks that LGBT people have rights and need rights and acceptance after decades of exclusion and marginalisation, he thinks he's being loving. He really does, earnestly. But equally, Jane Christian, who thinks that LGBT people need to know God more intimately and understand His plan for their life is different from what they might think, she thinks and believes earnestly that she is being loving. There's few people in this whole thing motivated towards LGBT people by hate. And that's important because hatred is in fact a motive. It's something in the heart. It's a desire. And it matters how people feel about these things. And that desire is not harboured by nearly everyone vis-a-vis the LGBT community. And to make it such a shallow thing, to say it's about hatred and love, is simply a political tool, and it's a means to marginalise someone, silence them and make them to be disliked. To love someone, what does it mean? Well, it actually means that you serve their highest and best interests. And the real difference is this. We disagree about what those highest and best interests actually are. The average member of the LGBT community, or indeed the average Australian, particularly in younger generations, believe that a person's highest and best interests is organised around principles like this: living for yourself, living out your identity, expressing who you really are, following the whims and the desires and the longings of the inner person, and more or less being me, and being empowered to be me and to live out who I think I really am from within. That's why we live in a generation of self-love, self-esteem and self-confidence and the selfie, right? That's why we live in a generation that uses the word identity more than any other generation ever. It's exploded in popularity. The inner person, see. That's why we live in a generation that started to build laws around identity to protect identity, because that's now the highest and most sacred thing. We once had blasphemy laws to stop people insulting God. Now we have vilification laws. What for? To stop people insulting my identity. Notice how we've changed what is most sacred and praiseworthy. And this is the massive collision of worldviews. This is a collision of worldviews such that many people think that Christians are totally barking mad. And the difference is this: the Christian actually thinks that the inner self, the desires of the heart, and the identity are the last thing we should live for. The self and the identity are corrupt, they're deceitful, they're unreliable, they're restless, they're full of sin from which we need to be saved, the lusts of the flesh, the lusts of the eyes, the pride of life, as the Apostle John puts it. That which flows out of the heart is what corrupts a person, says Jesus in 2 Gospels. That there's none by nature that does good or seeks after God, says the Apostle Paul. The heart is above all things desperately wicked, says the prophet Jeremiah. I could go on. Christians have at some point in their life been brought to a realisation. And they've been brought to the realisation that Paul describes, that he's the chief of sinners. Or that, he says, "Oh, wretched man that I am, in my flesh dwells no good thing." That realisation is a moment in the Christian life. And as a result, Christians live, I trust, if we're being brought into the life that we're called to, Christians live a life of radical humility, not pride. It's the world at large that marches under the flag that says pride in my identity. That's not the Christian way. It's in fact the dead opposite. Christianity is a life of seeking God, not self. Christianity is a life of shaping ourselves into what is good, which comes from God, not declaring ourselves to be already good. Christianity looks up. It does not look within. Christianity puts to death self and puts on Jesus Christ, to use the biblical language. Why? Because we've come to see the truth about God and the truth about ourselves and the truth about what is truly good and the truth about what truly needs to be changed. Sadly, we live in a society of people who have actually fallen in love with themselves to the degree that they see this basic difference and the beliefs that come out of this as hate. They say that it's so hateful that your achievements are invalid and your virtue is erased. And yet it is that simple difference which really explains what's at the heart of all of this. It's not hatred. It's actually a different understanding of what is love, because it's a different understanding of what is highest and most sacred, what is truly in our best interests. Is it the inner self, or is it what God gives us from above? It's the Romans 1:25 conflict. to worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator. And Paul calls it there the truth versus the lie. You know, there's no hatred here. It's just a different understanding of what life is all about, and two people colliding over that understanding. But when it does come to hatred, I want to raise something. I look at the prospect that a guy like Israel Folau will be persecuted and pursued relentlessly from all sides for the rest of his life, and made to pay in every possible way for his beliefs, many of which he never actually said and people have caricatured and characterised about him. But anyway, that's another story. Or I look at the possibility that perhaps the Margaret Court thing will never die. And perhaps they will try and rename the arena. I look at the possibility that all this will go on relentlessly, and I say, look, you know what, maybe hatred is coming from somewhere. But I don't think it's where they claim it's coming from. Hey, one more thing. You know, I've been looking at the metrics and I figured out something. You guys are watching the videos and not subscribing. So please help us out a great deal by hitting the like button and then hitting subscribe, hitting the bell as well so you get the notifications. It helps us out a really great deal, and you can click here to see more videos.